Hello, everybody. Welcome to Slam, the podcast that reviews every single DC superhero and all their incarnations. This is Mike L, and I'm joined by
Joshua Mervell, and today we're going to be taking a look at a couple of the origins for the comics character, the Spectre.
That's right. And to celebrate, we have brought our special guest back, and that's Paul Carbonero. Hey, Paul.
Hi.
Hey, welcome back.
That's what I got for you. Hi.
If only people knew the technical pandemonium we had before we started this episode, but it's all good now. Everything's working. We're not going to jinx it by, touching any buttons or anything. We're just going to jump right into it. So today we're reviewing Golden Age, Bronze Age, and later Bronze Age versions of the Spectre. We're going to start off with More Fun Comics number 52. And I'm going to tell everybody what happened in this story very quickly. We are introduced to a cop, a detective named Jim. I should know his last name.
Corrigan, yeah.
Corrigan, yes. I've only been reading Spectre stories for 40 years. I should know this. Jim Corrigan, there we go. Jim Corrigan, and it appears he's got a roommate. His roommate's name is, or a close friend, right? But they are
roommates as well, yeah.
Yeah. And I just got to say, besides the basic story, I'm just going to point out a couple of odd panels. Like right here and the opening page, he's talking to his friend, and he's like, what is he telling his friend here? It's kind of awkward. Wait, he says something to him, and then the guy says, tuxedo bow tie, it ought to be fun to see you a year from now. And he says, that ought to be fun ducking your head in the sink too. The next panel, it just cuts to like a woman coming in, and he's got his roommate's head pushed. I mean, unless my scan is weird, that is his roommate's head.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, he's pushing his head into a sink full of water. It's just the weirdest transition. But anyway, and they just go. Go ahead, Paul.
This is what people did in the 1940s if they weren't fighting in World War II.
Right, exactly. So anyway, so then they just go about their business like nothing happened. Jim Corrigan goes to he's on a case, and he scopes out some guys stealing. Sorry, my computer screen is really small and it's hard to read this. But some guys looks like they're knocking off a truck that's unloading things to a warehouse. So Jim Corrigan goes in, punches out one guy, then he punches out a couple others, and then meanwhile we see his girlfriend's waiting for him, and he's obviously late. And so I'm kind of skimming along here, but so that case, does that case end? I just read this. I should probably know, but that case,
I think so. And then he ends up meeting up with his girlfriend.
Yeah. So everything's okay. So he's chatting with his girlfriend, and we have a hilarious conversation where she says, "Why did you stop? Because it's high time I told you a thing or two. Why a real lady like you should be interested in a mug like me is beyond me. But one thing is certain, there's going to be one boss in our family. That's me." And of course, Corrigan, you're a tyrant, a bully, and a conceited fool, but I love you. And, it's just, this is exactly how people talk back in the 40s and 30s movies that I've seen. So this is par for the course.
That's what you do.
Anyway, exactly. Yeah. It's good stuff, right? So then he ends up getting cut off by the same guys from earlier, right? Mm-hmm. And they kind of not kidnap, but they kidnap Jim Corrigan and his girlfriend. They put him in this room, they knock him out, and then they put him into a barrel and fill the barrel with cement, right? Mm-hmm. And then they bring it over to a little pier and throw him into the river. And then we see the barrel plummet to the bottom of the river. We see a little fish swimming by. And then, the narration's like, down, down hurtles the barrel like a plummet until it strikes bottom and settles placidly up on its side. And then we see Jim Corrigan floating. Where am I? And then we see a beam of light come down ahead, a patch of light. And he sort of flies into the light. Now he's kind of in the cloudy, clouds. He's like, what's happening to me? And then all of a sudden a voice from above comes and basically it starts talking to him and kind of gives him a mission. Your mission on Earth is unfinished. You shall remain earthbound, battling crime on your world with supernatural powers. So basically, this voice from above tells Jim Corrigan that he's going to become this ghostly Avenger, right? But that's all it says. It doesn't give him a name or anything or a costume. He's still in his regular, suit and tie. So then he kind of floats back into his body and he wakes up at the bottom of the river and he's sitting there, but then he looks over, and I love this stuff, but he looks over and he sees the barrel that he was in and his hand sticking out. And that's when he realizes, wait a minute, a hand protruding from the cement. Good Lord, I must be looking at my own body. Gat Benson and his men did this to me. They'll pay for it, and heavily. So basically, he knows that he's a ghost now. And then once he swims to the surface, he actually floats above the surface and realizes that he can, float. And then he looks down and he notices his shadow, and then all of a sudden his shadow disappears. Now, I thought for a split second, oh, cool, he has the power to make his shadow disappear. No, he has the power of invisibility. It's just that they're not drawing it, right? Like he is invisible, but the reader can still see him. So anyway, so then he floats back to, like the pier, and then, the story's over. There you go. What'd you think? The origin of the Spectre. No, that's only part one, folks. It's so weird with these Golden Age stories. Like a lot of these, Paul, a lot of these stories we've read, like, I think it was Johnny Thunder. Johnny Thunder's Thunderbolt does not even appear until the third story. And Johnny Thunder doesn't even know he exists until like the 11th story. So these Golden Age stories are really, you can almost kind of rushed out, like maybe it was written as one story and they split it up. But so we do
it kind of feels like
going.
that too, because a lot of their introductions are in these like books where there's a collection of stories. So it definitely feels like they have like an entire comic written and then they kind of divide it into like 3 or 4 for the origin for sure.
Possibly, yeah. So now you'll notice that we could skip ahead here to issue 53. Paul, do you have access to 53? Did I send that one to you?
You probably did, and I'm sorry.
If you're able to look, are you able to look in your email while you're on the call with us?
Yeah. Let me check it out.
Okay. And as you're doing that, I'm just going to point out that the other scan we read is newsprint, and this one is clearly remastered, which means I'm only going to guess that when they reprint the origin of the Spectre, they actually focus on issue 53 and not 52, because this is where the Spectre actually appears. So, okay, hold on a sec here. You need another minute? Oh, go ahead.
And honestly, after reading the first one, I feel like you didn't even need it. Like, this is the only important stuff I think in it. Like, you get right at the start that he was a detective and he died, and now he's like discovering his powers for the first time. I think if you read this as the first introduction and not the like weird roommate stuff and the strange date that they go on and whatnot, you could just jump in and start here and it would be just fine.
Well, it is kind of in the middle of a story, but yeah, I know what you mean. But Paul, are you good? You still need a minute.
Yeah, I'm just looking over it because I thought actually, as Golden Age stories go, it was very solid and very blunt. And even with like some of the things that you described in the relationships and when he becomes the Spectre, and there's no nonsense about this guy, because if you remember in like Golden Age Batman, I always remember a scene where he knocks a criminal over the side railing in a factory or something into a vat of like boiling oil, which is conveniently there. And the guy plunges to his death, and Batman just says that's a fitting end for his kind. And you're like,
I remember that. Yeah.
Okay. But Spectre is very much like that. The beginning of the Spectre, he doesn't waste time. He doesn't, there's no nicety to it. So I thought it was very, very blunt. I actually liked it. I thought it was very effective,
Well, and also we pointed out the kind of gruesome image of the hand coming out of the barrel, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost one of those things where I grew up reading like the Spectre and All-Star Squadron and like Justice Society, but I guess I I didn't really realize. Oh yeah, like he is actually dead. Like he's a ghost. He's not a supernatural being.
Right.
He's a ghost, right? So that's something that kind of changed over the years. It's like every time they brought him back, they kind of tweaked his powers a little bit, which we'll get to later.
Mm-hmm.
But we're just gonna jump into part 2 of his origin story. Paul, do you have it open now?
Oh yeah, I'm looking at my favorite panel.
Oh, what's your favorite? Is that on page 1, or do you want to wait till we get to that?
Yeah, let's wait till we get to it. Go ahead.
Okay. So basically, we jump into part 2. This is More Fun Comics number 53, and the bad guys, they've knocked out his girlfriend, and then one of the guys, the boss, says he orders the one guy to shoot her, and he says, "I ain't never croaked a dame. This ought to be funny." And then all of a sudden, we just see his reaction. He says, "Holy cats! It's," and then he sees Jim Corrigan, but it's awkward because Jim Corrigan's standing next to the other two, but because the art is sort of primitive, it's not really clear. Like, yes, he's kind of darkened out with lines, but it's not quite clear what's going on. But his reaction's good though. And then we cut to this extreme close up of the thug's eyes. And he's like, drawn by a terrible hypnotic fascination, the gangster peers deep into Jim's dark eyes and glimpses death. And then he's like, he's back from the dead, Jim Corrigan. But then we see in the next panel, it's just an outline that's kind of darkened in of Jim Corrigan. So no one else can see him. So no one else believes him. But then, again, we see the ghost behind the two bad guys, right? But no one really believes the gangster, right? So then later on, Jim Corrigan kind of materializes. They try shooting him, but the bullets go through him. They try touching him, but his hands pass right through him. And then the guy gets turned into a skeleton, right? And then he just collapses. It's so, yeah.
Because, people in the 70s, maybe beginning of the 80s, who complained about Michael Fleisher and all the stuff that was written about him in the Comics Journal. What are they talking about? Just read this stuff. Look what he did to these guys.
Exactly.
Their skin's getting tighter. Oh, it's getting tighter. And then I love this panel because the criminal is reduced to a talking skeleton.
Uh-huh.
Not just a skeleton, a talking skeleton who says, what have you done to something? And Corrigan says, well, you've robbed, you've killed, and this is your reward.
Yes.
You're a talking skeleton, and you're about to disappear. This is comics gold.
I agree.
And the final thing he hears is Jim turning to him and saying, "Die," and he just crumbles into a pile of bones.
I
was surprised.
Yeah, just imagine this as a live action movie.
Oh yeah,
that would be so good. Like classic '80s special effects with just a talking skeleton. That would be great, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so then the other guy, the other bad guy, runs away, and then then Jim Corrigan is able to duplicate himself, right? So he looks like two Jim Corrigans, but again, he's just a ghost. So then now there's three Jim Corrigans.
Yeah.
And then eventually he ends up defeating the bad guy. He rescues his girlfriend, and then he realizes as he's holding his girlfriend that he's able. Her name's Clarice. He's able to heal her instantly, right? So that's another one of his powers. So then, and then once she wakes up, she starts talking to him. But the one thing that he clarifies in his thoughts is that he doesn't want her to know that he's a ghost, right? He's like, how can I tell her that, she's holding a ghost in her arms, right? So he realizes that he's dead. And so then the rest of the cops come, and he's driving along with his girlfriend, and he drops her off, and then she appears to float over her walkway, but I guess she's just walking. Look, there's kind of a lot of weird panels here, like the car just kind of floating in the air, but I guess it's supposed to just be going fast, right?
Right, and I think it's supposed to be because right before dropping her off, he breaks up with her in order to save her, I guess, from this new life. So yeah, her floating away is supposed to be her dramatically running, and then the car floating in the air is he's going so fast. He's so upset that the car's taking off or whatever. But yeah.
So then he goes home and he tells his roommate he's moving out. He's like, I'm moving into a room of my own, right? And the roommate's all shocked. So obviously he's decided he's got to like kind of started a whole new life so that he can dedicate himself to fighting crime. And then the next page, it kind of just awkwardly ends. And again, we have to talk more about this. But even though he's a ghost, and even though he's been assigned this mission, he still has to sew a costume himself. So I didn't realize this again until I read this. I thought that the Spectre had white skin. Maybe he does later, but in this story, no, it's a costume. He sews a white and green costume to wear over top of his skin. It's really weird. And then he kind of like walks out into the night and he dramatically is like narrating to himself, if only I could forget this grim mission, achieve eternal rest. No, the world needs me. I shall not be satisfied until criminal activities upon this earth are a thing of the past. And that's it. The Spectre. There you go.
Excuse me for just jumping in, but another thing that struck me was, Peter Parker, early 60s, sewing his Spider-Man outfit. Poor guy, he's got to sew his outfit. No, this was already done in the Golden Age with Jim Corrigan. Jim Corrigan, not only who jumps off trucks and battles gangsters all by himself, he's very good at sewing as well. And he's gone for the green, for the green and white color scheme, and fortunately had the material hanging around. But, so Peter Parker was not the first one to do this.
Great point. And again, I'm sure that they'll change this in the revised Origins to come, but the fact that he has to sew a white, ghostly-looking costume to put over top of his skin is ridiculous because he already is a ghost, right?
Right.
But so, Josh, what are your thoughts on this first appearance of Spectre?
I surprisingly liked it. Usually, I'm not a huge fan of the original Origins as much. Like, they're kind of sloppy. They feel not really thought out. But this one was a very solid, straight to the point story. You got this cop. He runs into some bad guys. He gets killed. And then instead of dying, he somehow gets brought back to Earth as a spirit to fight bad guys for the rest of eternity. Like, that is so simple, so straightforward. They don't have to put in all this extra fluff going on. And everything was also pretty clearly done as well, I thought, especially with the confusion that you were talking about, Mike, with them not like fully explaining that when he has like the hatches, he's semi-transparent or something weird with his visibility. Even with all of that, I thought everything was very clear, and we actually had time because there was no like unneeded junk happening in the story. We actually had time to see what was happening in the story, and each panel was like very deliberate. So especially particularly for these like 30s 40s comics, this one was, I think, particularly well done.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I really like the gruesomeness because, again, if you're going to do a horror story, then make it horrific, right? Like, make it creepy and kind of a unique character. The fact that he actually is a ghost, that's a pretty cool idea. Obviously, his powers will change over the years and his origin will be tweaked over the years, but I thought this was pretty effective. I guess the only thing I wish is that, for the sake of logic, I wish that when he was made into the Spectre, again, he just magically had the white skin, right? That would have been an improvement. But other than that, I thought it was pretty good. Paul, what did you think?
Yeah, I was surprised because I don't usually like Golden Age stuff. And I agree with Josh. Everything Josh said, I agree with. It's very solid, very to the point. Doesn't leave you in any doubt about stuff. And it's interesting learning about his abilities. Suddenly, he can duplicate himself. That's kind of handy. Suddenly, he can heal. Like, wow, that's kind of handy. And he can reduce people to skeletons and nothing. And that's kind of handy. And, I take a cheap shot, really, at Alan Moore, which I shouldn't because he's such a great writer. I'm not sure even Alan Moore could be upset with the thought balloon use here. like when he's thinking, how can I tell her she's wrong, that she holds a ghost in her arms?
Mm-hmm.
You need thought balloons for dramatic irony. There's nothing wrong with them. I don't know, because Alan Moore said you shouldn't have that. That's weak writing. And then suddenly nobody has thought balloons. But here you see a good example of why the thought balloon is handy, because we know what he's about. He's telling us what his thoughts, but the other characters don't know, but we know.
Right.
So it makes you feel like you're part of you're in the in crowd. You're part of the story. But yeah, very, very entertaining. I mean, what fun it is. I can't get over that. I can't. My skin's tightening. It's tightening. What's happening? Oh, a talking skeleton. You gotta love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree with you too with the over explanation in dialogue or thought bubbles can be overwhelming at times. But I thought it was used pretty well here. Everything that Jim was thinking, and we can read what he's thinking. It feels like something he would actually be thinking to himself, and not him narrating what he's doing. Right? Like it feels like his thought bubbles feel natural, like it's natural dialogue in his head, and not him like, I'm gonna pick up my phone now and I'm gonna dial this number. Like it's not, so deliberate.
It's providing extra information. Yeah.
It reveals more of him to us.
Right.
Yeah. The moisture on the window as well was such a great touch. I thought, like, he could have just thought, no, I can't love her, I'm dead. But like him kind of like, how am I going to live this life with her while I like a ghost? I'm not living. And then he's like thinking, leaning up against the window, and then his like breath, he's not seeing the breath. Like it's so, I don't know. It's so interesting.
And one thing I totally agree, but one thing I haven't mentioned at all is that this was the Spectre was created by Jerry Siegel and Bernard Baily. So Jerry Siegel's not just a one-trick pony. Now, it is interesting that Jerry Siegel did not create the Spectre with Joe Shuster, and Bernard Baily is credited as the co-creator, but apparently he was just an artist assigned to the strip. So Jerry Siegel might have created Spectre completely on his own. I don't know if that means he also designed his costume or not, but that is, something that I learned in my extensive research I did just 5 seconds ago. But yeah, so just wanted to point that out, give some credit where credit is due. But anyway, that is the Golden Age version of the Spectre. Like most superheroes, he lasted throughout the Golden Age. He was part of the Justice Society. His strip was canceled. Justice Society was canceled. Now, unlike the Flash, the Atom and Hawkman, and Green Lantern, when he was brought back in the 60s, it was not a rebooted Spectre. It was the original Spectre, just brought back in Earth 2. We're not going to review those issues. Instead, we're going to skip ahead to a more critically acclaimed era of the Spectre by Michael Fleisher and Jim Aparo, whom we all love because he's our favorite Batman artist, at least my favorite Batman artist. But so he was revived in as a section of Adventure Comics in the 1970s, and Paul is going to tell us what happens in this first issue of that series. Well,
it's basically the 1940s all over again, because Michael Fleisher just picks up where this one leaves off. There's basically no difference. It's
very similar. You're right.
Gangsters, they do bad things. The main gangster, of course, double crosses and has no hesitation in like killing off a fellow gangster. The Spectre has to come and sort them out, and he does. And what does he do in the climax to the story with the main gangster? Well, suddenly the lights come on, so to speak, and the gangster's being reduced to a skeleton. He has a fondness for skeletons. And the only thing I could think that some people could have considered a little distasteful is that there are like innocent people around where they see this, and it's quite horrific, really. And I wonder if some people, even in the 70s, and we're talking about sensitivity today, but maybe even in the 70s, where they thought, well, can we really have our heroes doing this? They've got Spectre has no regard for who's there, or there could be children there or whatever. There's no regard. It's just like, okay, this person is being reduced to a skeleton. And in another Fleischer's Spectre, which was quite infamous, he took a chainsaw or something to a bad guy and sliced him up like he was wood, reduced to wood.
Right. He turned to wood, right? Yes.
Then sliced in wooden chunks. But like you said, it's a horror story. But you know what happened to horror in the 1950s with EC? So the Comics Code guys were still around causing mischief in the mid-70s. And I think probably Fleischer got some pushback about that stuff. But the short answer to your intro to the 70s Spectre I think it was in Adventure, wasn't it?
Yeah, Adventure Comics, yeah.
Yeah, was simply that Michael Fleischer just picked up where the 1940s left off, and it didn't bother me. And the art, of course, the art's very appealing. So I liked it. But, let me say one negative thing.
Sure.
Before we go on. And that is, anytime in the 70s when I bothered to look at a DC comic, because I was a Marvel zombie.
Okay.
And every now and again, I might look at a DC comic just in case I was missing something. And even though I kind of enjoyed this one, because I bought the Fleischer Aparo Spectre, even though I kind of enjoyed it, I thought, again, though, there's no characterization really going on. It's just a story. And somebody, in this case, Corrigan, is placed in the story. And, I've come to the conclusion over many years that the story is not really important. It's always the characters, always. You could have a background of World War II. You could have a background of a criminal enterprise. You could have a Kree-Skrull war. The important thing is it's the characters, not the story, which sounds really strange to say, but it's not. The characters are number one, first and foremost. And if there isn't characterization going on, stories are a dime a dozen. So even though this Fleischer Spectre was enjoyable, it didn't compel me to get more or to seek out back issues or keep buying. Marvel Comics often did, because I want to know what's going on with these characters from one issue to the next. In this, I didn't have any reason. I felt I didn't have any particular reason to follow Jim Corrigan.
Well, I think what it was they Michael Fleischer probably, and by the way, I believe Michael Fleischer had an uncredited co-plotter, and I don't know who it was, but I just want to point that out quickly. But it might have been here, art continuity, Russell Carley. What does that even mean?
Yes.
Art continuity. Yeah. But it's more like he came up with a bunch of gruesome ideas and then kind of just wrote a story around that, right? Like, what are some really cool ways that I can kill these bad guys, and then wrote a story around that. I don't think the story is bad at all. I think it's fine, but you are right. There's definitely no characterization of story arcs. It's more just like, what is a creative way that we can have the Spectre kill people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does feel like not an epilogue, like a prologue to a story, like almost like a cold open.
Something else
of reintroducing this character, right? Because we don't really learn anything about Jim or the Spectre. He kind of just shows up and starts taking care of these like band of bandits that have robbed this bank and shot a bunch of people. So, we don't really see anything kind of like change throughout. We also don't even really see like. He technically gets revenge on like some of the people that were shot or injured, but we didn't know anything about them for them to be like avenged. So it also didn't feel like it was Jim's story. He was,
sure.
It could have been any bad guy, and he just showed up and took care of it. So, while interesting and beautifully drawn, and the action is amazing. The story is just kind of fine. Like it's like almost like a nothing story.
Right. And I just want to point out, I know that our listeners can't see these panels, but if you can get your hands on Adventure Comics 431, you can take a look at this beautiful art by Jim Aparo. There's just so many. Yep, so many. He's just a master storyteller, master of composition. Like, and this was him at his peak. I mean, he was always good, but he was at his peak in the early 70s, I feel like, on Aquaman and Spectre and like early Batman. So there's just some gorgeous panels in here. And go ahead.
And out of all three, this one feels the most gruesome, horror-esque for sure. By far.
Well, we didn't really explain, but so the ways that he executes these bad guys are one of them is driving his car down the road, and the Spectre appears as this giant visage and scares the guy into running his car off the road and exploding and dying in a fiery ball of flame. Then the next guy, he
melts him.
He turns him into wax, melts him. That's horrific.
It's horrifying.
And then we see like an actual like pile of wax just melted onto a chair. And then the
and it's like flesh color and like and before that, like he's looking at his own hands melting. Like it's genuinely so terrifying, like way worse than being turned into a skeleton.
I agree. Crazy. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is then the next one, echoes of the origin story. He goes into a plane and turns the guy into a skeleton, and the skeleton just collapses. And like Paul said, it's in front of like regular people witnessing. So yeah, if there were any kids in the on the airplane, they're going to be scared too. We could even see the skeleton still holding the gun. So it was pretty quick the way it happened. But I gotta say, this artwork, even on the final page when the commissioner is like, get out there and find these guys. That expression on Jim Corrigan's face as he's looking back, it's almost like completely cold. Like he has no sympathy. He doesn't care. He's not happy. He's not sad. But I just love that expression on his face. I love it. He's like, well, we've got an entire city sealed off. Those mugs don't have a ghost of a chance. Like he's not smiling about it. He's not happy. He's just doing his job. I love it. It was great.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, this Spectre lasted a little while, maybe a year or so, and then it also was canceled. The Spectre came back later, but he wasn't really as effective as this for a while. Then he appeared in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and we should point out, if you read the Who's Who entries that I sent in the email, if you read the Spectre superpowers, it actually says the Spectre is the most powerful being. Wait, let me just read it here. The Spectre was the most powerful known being in the universe. It's ridiculous. Crazy. Like, come on. Like, how can you write a story about a character that powerful, right? So,
it's pretty interesting. Like that sort of character that is just so like omni-powerful, I think is super interesting, but is not somebody that can hold a story, I think.
Yes, right.
And maybe this issue proves that, where there's not really much of a story and we're kind of just seeing these bad guys get their comeuppance. And I think he would be a really interesting character in other people's stories, I think, as like a reoccurring character, like maybe in like a mystical type of character story, like a Dr. Fate type thing, where kind of dealing with the afterlife or something, right? Where he can kind of be this foe for Dr. Fate or like a character like that without being just like a supervillain. He's kind of just doing his job like the Grim Reaper. Right. And yeah, I don't know.
Well,
it would sorry.
No, go ahead.
It would also be cool to see him deal the like payback on these bad guys in the same way that they harmed other people.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe they were kind of going for that with the whole wax melting thing, because they were throwing grenades at them and they were like, the cops were on fire and stuff like that. But I think that could be super interesting if they leaned into that aspect of like your revenge, like you kind of reap what you sow.
Right. We should also point out that it's always implied that the voice is the voice of God. And we are to assume this is an Old Testament God, right? Like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth type of justice, right? Which is fine. That's a great character, right, to explore. But like you said, he's so all powerful. There's not really a story there. It actually there's a movie that slightly reminds me of this, and that's The Crow. Has anyone seen The Crow movie?
Yeah.
I know what happened to Brandon Lee, but that's about it.
Okay, so it's a pretty good movie as far as visually, as far as tone, right? It's in the early 90s, post-Batman. The actual story, there really isn't one. Once he becomes the Crow and once he's able to exact revenge on these bad guys, he just kills everybody. So there's no challenges after that, right? So it's kind of like the Spectre, where he doesn't overcome any obstacles to defeat them.
I have a question, though, for the
Sure.
two. Where, considering what we've just discussed, melting the bad guy, tremendous, blowing, having another, I can't stop laughing. It makes me laugh, like an evil kind of laugh, and having another bad guy in a ball of flame. Where was the comics code?
That's a good question. But you know what? I think this must have been when the comics code was relaxed in the early 70s, because that was why Marvel was able to create Werewolf by Night, Morbius, the Living Vampire, right? They relaxed it a little bit, and that's where the horror explosion came from. So this must be part of that, I'm going to guess.
Right.
Yeah, I guess unless they were just taking a nap when these issues went by.
Could be, yeah. Or somebody was paid off.
I also wonder too if like him turning into wax was kind of the like censorship. They couldn't just melt him and melt his flesh.
You're right. Maybe.
I'm going to turn you into wax and melt you, or the lights flickering off in the airplane and then they turn back on and he's a skeleton instead of like burning, stuff like that. But I was still shocked at some of the moments.
Right. So anyway, as we were saying, so Spectre participated in the Crisis, and then after the Crisis, he was revamped by Doug Moench and Gene Colan, and they obviously figured that he was too powerful, and so they addressed that in the first issue of the Spectre #1 from April 1987. And Josh, you are going to tell us what happens in this issue, right?
Sure, yeah. This is an interesting one. Really crazy cover. We kind of see this gigantic Spectre holding the earth in the palm of his hands, and all of these like bodies are making streams that are like swirling around him. It's really interesting, very abstract. Definitely sets the tone of the craziness happening in this book. But before we jump into the craziness, we're introduced to a character I was not familiar with, Kimmy Lang. And she's working in an office, and she's kind of like humming to herself. She's very happy-go-lucky. She's enjoying her life, blah, 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 blah. And then we quickly cut over to the Spectre. We see this like huge splash page after. And this is where I'm not 100% sure if I'm assuming that this is very similar to the other two origins where he's first getting his powers.
No, this is the same Jim Corrigan from 1941.
So he's just getting his power stripped from him at this point.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So this narration is kind of talking about how he wasn't living up to his potential, and that's what I was confused about too. Was Jim not living up to his potential before he died, or was it the Spectre not doing his duties, which is what was kind of lost with me? But knowing that makes a lot of sense. So this like being, this god, is kind of explaining that Spectre was not doing his job properly. He had these amazing abilities, but wasn't doing all that he could, so he's being stripped of his powers. And all while we're kind of following this story with Kimmy Lang at work, and she's all of a sudden kind of just overworking, and she decides that she's not gonna stick around this place anymore. She quits. She leaves the job, we keep cutting back and forth between her and Spectre as he's kind of floating in this astral plane and this like nothingness, and kind of getting these crazy narrations of how everything's going to be different from now on. And as Kimmy is walking down the street on her way home, she is hit by like a pot or something, and scared, she kind of ducks into a doorway and decides to go inside the shop. And it's this kind of like witchy fortune teller shop, and she's introduced to Madame Xanadu.
Xanadu, right?
She kind of pulls some tarot cards, and Kimmy's like, "Oh, are those my tarot cards? Is like, are you going to tell me my future?" And she says, "No, your future does not lie here. It lies in this this storage locker in Grand Central Station. Go there and you'll see what your future's all about." We get some more Spectre kind of floating around space, and then Kimmy's going to this locker and she sees this giant vase, like huge. She gets some officers there to help her deliver it back to Madame Xanadu. The delivery people leave, and as they're kind of sitting there talking, she shows Kimmy the tarot cards, and the vase shatters, and Jimmy Corrigan actually spills out from it. And we cut over actually at this point to a police officer who is working with or knows Jimmy personally. So he breaks into his apartment to see what's going on, why he hasn't been around for a while. And he's walking through his apartment and he's seeing that like it's been abandoned for a while. There's cockroaches everywhere, rotting food. And he picks up a jar of ketchup, and there's like two eyes in the jar of ketchup that that like stare into him and essentially like hypnotize him and possess him. So we see him kind of like start to sweat. He runs out of the building with the ketchup bottle. Then all of the stuff in the fortune teller shop kind of starts going crazy. Things are flying around. And that's when Spectre is kind of thrown back into Jim Corrigan's body. And all while this police officer is kind of confused as to what's happening, and he's realizing that he's maybe being possessed and something weird is going on. Like he opens up a bottle and a bunch of flies are flying around him and whatnot. But we find out that Kimmy is somehow connected with Jim's new origin and his powers, and she is the key to like him gaining these abilities back for some reason. Like and Madame Xanadu knew this and was kind of planning all of this. It's not explained in this comic really, but she faints, and then Xanadu and Jim are kind of talking to each other, and she's kind of like, you need to pick up Kimmy and go up to the offices so we can discuss what's going on. The police officer has to feed cardboard to the ketchup bottle in the bathtub, and it starts turning into this like big goopy monster and swallows the police officer at the end. And we're kind of promised that the Spectre and Kimmy fates are now intertwined, and they're going to learn how the Spectre is going to use his new powers or gain his powers back, possibly. But it's definitely the beginning of a story.
Right.
In kicking things off.
Well, okay. Can I just say,
yeah.
Somehow, of the three stories, this one's the most confusing.
For sure.
Even though it's the most modern, I felt. I'm not a huge fan of Doug Moench or Doug Moench. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. He's done some okay stories for Batman, but he was actually kind of fired from Batman right before this, and then this is what he was given afterwards. I've read a few issues from this run. I'm not a huge fan of it. Even this opening story, it's bouncing back and forth between the woman and Jim Spectre, but there's no real purpose for where they cut or why they cut. There's no real parallels to what's going on. And this issue commits a sin. I really can't stand this. When the writers decide there's going to be a new direction for the characters, and instead of just letting it happen naturally, we have a character explain it. And in this case, God explains to the Spectre, well, you're not really doing anything. You're not really serving a purpose. So I'm going to reduce your powers, and you're going to be go back to haunting and halting killers, and blah blah blah. And then once he appears, I believe it's the woman that somehow, is it Madame Xanadu?
Yeah,
it's
she's like
yes, explaining everything, right? Like, oh yes, you're still yes, you changed back into Jim Corrigan, and it's painful, but it'll become less painful each time you do it. Like, why couldn't we just figure that out as the series went along? You know?
It would have been way more interesting if he's like the Spectre, Jim is starting to like feel things again that he hasn't in a while, right? Because he's this ghost, and then all of a sudden he's starting to feel things that mortals feel. So he goes to this fortune teller to figure out what's going on, and the two of them kind of like learn together that he's losing his powers, and it's very strange that they kind of half explain the idea of this new origin, because they don't explain why or how he's connected to Kimmy. How Madame Xanadu knows all of this and what's going on. I understand not like they do explain, I guess, why he's losing his powers, but they have to literally tell you and not show you, or the character's like finding out, right?
Right. To be honest, the only idea I liked in the whole story was that weird ketchup bottle with the eyes or face.
Sure, I'm not really understand why, but it's cool.
That was cool. That was cool. And we'll talk about the art later. But honestly, I did not like this issue, and I not only do I not want to read more, but apparently the series was so poorly received that they canceled it with number 31, like mid-story. The story arcs were never even wrapped up. So, and then it was rebooted by another writer in a new number 1. But anyway, Paul, what did you think of the Spectre number 1?
There's so much I can say about this. I have to try and keep it truncated.
Okay.
Where can I start? By this point in time, I was reading as many DCs as Marvel. The Marvel Zombie days were behind me.
Sure.
I may have even been reading more DCs than Marvel. And so when I saw the Spectre and it said Gene Colan and Doug Moench, of course, originally from Marvel, I got it really, no hesitation. I thought, I love this name, the Spectre. I love the green and white combination. I love Gene Colan. And as you said, Doug Moench from time to time has done good stuff, like on Master of Kung Fu particularly, and so on. And so I didn't hesitate. I loved the quality of the paper. It was a bit higher quality paper, if you remember that. It wasn't Baxter paper, I think. I forget what it was.
It was Mando paper.
Mando, that's right. Mando, new format, Mando paper.
Right.
So I just loved it. I mean, in comparison, did I want to read Marvel's Team America? No. Did I want to read US 1? No. And I wanted like a Doug Moench, Gene Colan, Spectre. So I really wanted to like it, and because I did, I was much more patient about it. It's a kind of mess, but they're trying to do a lot in a little space, really. Where with the reintroduction, and we're going to depower him, and we need a supporting character, Madame Xanadu, who I remembered very fondly, the Steve Englehart Madame Xanadu. So that was another touch. And with the human character, the Kimmy, that's her name, right? Kimmy. She's our human character there. So I was very, very charitable with it and thought it's all right. I know this is a bit all over the place and it's a bit hard to make sense of, but I'm with it. As long as Doug Moench and Gene Colan are doing this, I'm going to stay with it. And I did. But I think Gene Colan only did about 6 issues. I wanted to double check that because
Sure, I'll check. Yep.
I have 1 to 6. And I think, did I stop because Gene Colan stopped drawing it? Or what would the reason have been? But I was thrilled to see this new Spectre, and thrilled in so many ways. I shared your confusion, but I thought, no, I'm going to stick with it. The last thing about this is that look what we're saying about it in comparison to the 70s Fleisher story and the 40s story. And the first two, absolutely, totally clear. There's no mistaking this story step by step by step. And then we complained a bit, or I complained a bit, about a lack of characterization. But the story is crystal clear, crystal clear. And so, I mean, you can take it or leave it, but it's crystal clear. But when you read this one, you're like, who? What?
Yeah.
Why? So, I mean, it's the opposite in something like that, you know. The last 2 little bits I can say about it are on my one visit to the Marvel offices in 1985, I was in the office, Carl Potts, editor. I was in his, and John Bogdanov came in with artwork. And Carl Potts told him, which is surely a directive from Jim Shooter, draw it so clearly a blind man can read it. I've never forgotten that. And of course, in the 40s story and the 70s story particularly, it was so a blind man could read it. And we wanted a bit more than that, you know? But then here we are with the Doug Moench Gene Colan one, and maybe we got too much. So we need a happy medium in between the 70s version, the 40s, 70s version, and the mid-80s version. And the last thing is, and I only say this because I think there's a connection. On one occasion, I met Marv Wolfman when I was working in Hollywood for a brief time, and he came to my office because I was trying very hard to get Night Force made into a movie and was actually making some progress with it. And so he came to see me to talk about it. And even he felt, though, that by the time Gene Colan was at DC drawing like Night Force, his art was in a bit of decline. And this is later than Night Force. I think this is maybe 2 or 3 years later. And so, you know, I think even the art, it's still got that Gene Colan flair, you know, the layouts and everything, which we love, or I love for sure. But I think it's a fair point. I think this is not Gene Colan in the ascendancy. This is a Gene Colan a bit in decline. And I think that disappointed me a little.
Gene Colan was definitely, I think his best stuff is probably Tomb of Dracula for me, for my money. I like some of his Batman, definitely, but I think the other problem with this issue is the inks by, I believe it's Steve Mitchell. They just don't really suit him.
Right.
The other thing I want to point out is you were correct. Gene Colan only did the first 6 issues of this run of the Spectre.
Maybe that was the time he had a run-in with Dick Giordano. It was pretty bad, and then he was banned from entering the DC offices. Whatever he had to be just dropped off at the desk and go
Interesting.
Away.
Wow. Okay.
So maybe something.
So now, did you read this series all the way up to number 31?
No, because without Gene Colan, I said bye.
Gotcha. Now, there was another reboot or whatever revamp of the Spectre after this by John Ostrander and Tom Mandrake, which maybe we'll get to eventually on this podcast. But anyway, this is the Golden Age Spectre, the Bronze Age Spectre, and the Post-Crisis Spectre we've just reviewed. For my money, if I was going to go and read more, I would probably read the 70s one, even though the story was not great. It had the Jim Aparo art, and it had the horrific death scenes. So that's probably my preference, or my favorite one out of these 3. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it was my favorite of the three as well. I'm maybe not as much now, knowing that it doesn't get better, but I'm definitely more interested in continuing this third one, the one from the 80s, because it feels like they have an idea and a direction they want to go. And I'm hoping that it kind of gets on its feet and kind of goes somewhere.
Sure.
But obviously knowing now that it doesn't, I probably wouldn't go and read more of this.
Right. Okay. So Paul, what's your favorite of the three?
Strangely, the 80s one. Because I appreciate and enjoyed the 40s one, which surprised me. I appreciated and enjoyed the 70s one for various reasons. But I want more because, as I said, when I saw the Fleisher one in the 70s, I read an issue and thought, oh, yeah, that's okay. But nothing to make me come back. And Doug mentioned Gene Colan had a good amount of credit in my bank. So I forgive the bit of a mess that the first one is. And I'm just excited that they're doing it, that it's on Mando paper, that I'll be patient, I'll give it time, I'll stick with them. As long as they stick with it, I'll stick with them. And I think things will become more refined as time goes by. So I was excited to see where it would go. But then, after issue 6, no more Gene Colan, and I'm fickle like that, I guess. And so
I got you. No, I'm with you. All right. Well, there you go. We definitely would like to thank you, Paul, for joining us for this episode. Another Golden Age classic DC superhero, right? The Spectre. And then I should also point out that I don't know if it was this series or the next one, but there's a couple of guest appearances by artists. One of them is Jim Aparo, and one of them is John Ridgway. He's a British artist that I really like. So if you get a chance, check those issues out for sure. Yeah, and I guess that's pretty much it. We'd love to have you on again in the near future, so we'll keep you posted on some of the other characters that we're reviewing if you're interested. So awesome. All right, there you go. Be sure to join us on our next episode of Slam. We're going to be doing a live one. We're going to be doing Superman Part 2. We're going to be covering the next 3 versions of Superman's origin. He's got a lot of origins. But anyway, yeah, so be sure to join us for that. And Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. You can find all of our stuff over on our website at thecomicbooksyndicate.com. You can also find our stuff on Facebook and YouTube at the Comic Book Syndicate. Please leave us a comment or, drop a review letting us know what you guys think about the comics and, things we're talking about. Keep in touch because we want to keep that comics conversation going.
That's right. So until the next time, see you later.